Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Elder Justice Initiative webinar, Collecting Evidence in Cases of Elder Physical Abuse and Caregiver Neglect. As with all technology, we may at some point experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. In the event of such a problem, please just be patient and remain with us, and the webinar should resume shortly. We do want to take a moment here to see that everyone is connected, so if you are experiencing a technical problem at this point, please type a private chat message to the technical specialist, Jason, in the feedback box. That's the chat feature on your lower right. If you cannot access the chat, you can also send Jason an email at jadams@ovcttac.org. If you do have questions that come up throughout the webinar for our presenters or any technical problems, you can use that chat feature also to submit questions for our presenters. We do want to take time to note that today's session is being recorded and it will be made available on the OVC TTAC training website and the Elder Justice Initiative website following the webinar. EJI has put together a series of webinars for various audiences working in the field of elder abuse and justice, and so all of those webinars and trainings and resources and materials can be found on their website as well. Due to the nature of the topic being discussed today, we will be using some photos for training purposes that may be considered graphic. So we want to advise you to use your discretion when viewing those images today. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to our host, Yolanda Campbell, trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative. Yolanda.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, everyone. We're glad that you're able to listen in today, and hopefully you'll find this webinar pretty useful. Before we get into the meat of what you're here for today, I just wanted to remind everyone that the Elder Justice Initiative does have a website at www.justice.gov/elderjustice. And there's a screenshot of it here, and the website has a lot of useful resources throughout it for people who work in the field of elder abuse or even victims, and we highly recommend that you take some time to go through the website to see if there's any useful resources for you. And as Lori said, the webinar today will also be posted on the website. So today we have two presenters with us. We have Cherie Hill and Brian Foxx. Cherie Hill is currently a field training officer with the Anaheim Police Department. Over the previous 12 years, she was a detective assigned to the Family Protection Detail, where she developed an expertise investigating cases of elder abuse, elder neglect, and suspicious elder deaths. She's been a member of the Orange County Elder Abuse Forensic Center since its inception and has developed a law enforcement focus meeting for the center. She has presented both regionally and nationally on the subject of elder abuse, and Cherie has been a law enforcement officer for 20 years. In addition to Cherie, we have Brian Foxx. He's a deputy city attorney for the City of Anaheim. He's worked as a prosecutor for the City of Anaheim for 20 years. The last 2 years, he's been assigned to the Orange County Family Justice Center, and prior to working as a city attorney, Brian was a criminal defense attorney. He graduated with honors from Western State University College of Law in 1995. So today, Brian and Cherie are going to talk to you all about their experience with collecting and using evidence in elder abuse cases, what to look for, where to find the evidence, and how prosecutors are able to use that evidence to convict offenders. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian and Cherie.
Thank you, Yolanda. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. So what I want to do is look at these different pictures. So which is elder abuse? As we go through our presentation today, just take note of certain things that we're going to look for in these cases. One of these cases is actually a result of neglect, and the other actually is not. So we'll hopefully have some evidence that we can point out to you as we go on.
And part of what we want to convey is that the picture or what you initially see or think may not be what's going on.
So it's important to note that the legal definition of elder abuse varies among states and territories. So we're going to go over the California statutes. I'd like each of you to look at your own particular statute for your states or territories. Right now we're going to talk about California since that's what I am familiar and we are familiar with. So for our state statute, an elder is defined as age 65 years or older. And we also have under that same statute of elder abuse a dependent adult, which is 18 to 64, and they're physically or mentally challenged. Again, we're going to talk about elders today, and then we'll go in more to the definition.
Basically, what you're dealing with is anybody who knows or reasonably should know that a person is an elder or dependent adult and under circumstances likely to produce great bodily harm or death, willfully causes or through neglect permits an elder or dependent to suffer from unjustifiable physical pain or mental suffering. And so that is, we're going to go through the classifications of those people. But it's also when you're dealing with the care of custody of that person. It can't just be a family member. It has to be somebody who's taken on some kind of increased supervision of that individual or has reason to be taking care of them. But it's, again, that willfully causes or permits that person's health or the elder dependent to be injured or willfully causes them to be placed in a situation to be injured, they're then guilty of a crime.
So just make sure, again, to know your state statutes. So a caregiver, elder abuse, what we found out in the field is that it's typically committed by a caregiver or a person in a position of trust. Studies have actually shown that 80% of those that commit a crime on an elder are actually a family member, whether an adult child, a grandchild, or a spouse. The other thing that I think that it's important for us to know that when we look at these cases of elder abuse and neglect is that it could be a paid caretaker or what I call an opportunist, somebody that just kind of is a little vulture and goes in there to take care of an elder to get their money or to physically abuse them.
Now, in the last 50 years, or actually between 1950 and 2000, the elder population continues to grow as medical science improves, as healthcare improves. We've seen an explosion in the elder population, that's 65 years or older. And basically 10,000 people will turn 65 every day in the United States. And that's what makes senior the fastest growing segment of the population.
Categories of abuse that we're going to look at. Well, there are actually several categories. There's physical abuse of an elder. There's financial abuse. And what we see is that the physical and the financial are usually tied hand in hand. There's neglect of an elder. There's absolutely sexual assault of elders that occurs whether we choose to believe that or not. And there is emotional abuse, which is rampant. It's more difficult to prove. But today we're going to talk about really two categories, and that's going to be physical abuse of an elder and neglect. And again, we're talking about caretakers here, abusing the elder. So how do we think about why don't victims report abuse? And I think it's important to go over this. They don't report it for a lot of reasons. So when we go out in the call and we think, well, that elder's not saying anything. They're not telling me that anybody abused them. Well, guess what? They might be incapacitated due to an illness, whether they can't speak for themselves, whether they have a mental lack capacity. Sometimes that caretaker or perpetrator is a relative, and like I said earlier, 80% of the time that person is going to be a family member or their trusted caregiver. A lot of elders, they're afraid to go to a nursing home. They'd rather stay and be emotionally, physically abused than go to a nursing home. And who do the reports come from? We're seeing them by medical personnel, banks, and additional family members that maybe that victim is being isolated and the family member can't get a hold of them, so they contact law enforcement.
Also remember, one of the largest and fastest growing employment segments is that home health care worker. And that also plays into the reason that these people don't report. You're dealing with an individual, whether it's a family member or a home health care worker, who knows your schedule, knows your doctors, knows where you live, knows who to contact, knows the ability to stop you from being able to communicate with these people. So they have some control over your life, and you're worried that if you do report, what's going to happen to you or who's going to take care of you.
So we're going to talk about physical abuse and caretaker neglect. Okay, so physical abuse includes a lot of categories. And I'm not a doctor, however, through my experience, I've learned that physical abuse is the unnecessary administration or withholding of drugs. For example, you have a person with Parkinson's disease. And sometimes I've actually had cases where family members or caretakers have not given that person their medication that would enable them to be more mobile. So that's a case of physical abuse. I've also had cases where somebody's had Alzheimer's and they're being over-medicated so that they can't get up and be mobile. There's misuse of physical restraints, and what I'm talking about is if a person, and this is important to note, that for physical restraints to be used in a facility or anywhere, basically, a doctor has to give written permission for that. So I've had cases where people have been physically restrained, and there have been no doctor notes in hospitals or in facilities. Important to look for a prescription for physical restraints. There's also false imprisonment, whether that's being over-medicated or under-medicated or locked into a room or isolated. Unnecessary force feeding, and we're going to talk about bruising and what things to look for, but people have had cases where people are force-fed. You can't do that to somebody. That's abuse, and we'll talk about what bruising to look for when a person is force-fed. And there's deprivation of food or water. And something I really want to emphasize, and Brian will add on to this, I'm sure, that anything that you can do to a toddler or an infant, such as shaking that person or slapping them or pushing or hitting or kicking, burning, it happens to elders and we've seen it. I've had a case where a 93-year-old man was immobile and yet he had a brain bleed. And what we found out was that his caretaker, who was his wife that was 40 years younger and taking from him financially, was actually shaking him. So he got a brain bleed, which eventually led to his death. I've had cases where there's been scalding. So just know that, again, anything that can be done for those law enforcement that go out there and investigate cases, think of this person. They're not going to report it. They might not be able to speak for themselves. But look at signs of indicative of abuse. Anything that can happen to a child can happen to an elder.
And also remember, too, that, the caregiver's always going to try to explain to you that they did these things because it was in the best interest of the patient. And where the abuse comes into play is when you're looking at the factors of, well, yeah, the person may be an eloper, maybe somebody who gets up and runs away, but just because they are difficult to maintain doesn't allow you to drug them into oblivion or to tie them to a bed or to hit them because they're not listening to you or they're acting out. It's the seniors, the elder abuse, and the dependent adults. The law still says they have to be treated a certain way, and so those are the factors you need to look at. Don't just listen to what the caregivers are telling you. Listen to what the facts are showing you.
And that's such an important point. I'm so glad you said that. And we're going to look at also the importance of medical records in these types of cases as well. So indicators of physical abuse, there's actually a study that came out of UCI, and it was published in the Journal of American Geriatrics. It shows that bruising on an elder, whether it's on the face, the neck, the torso, and the lateral areas of the arms, was indicative of abuse. And again, this study was, we'll have a resource too at the end. But so if you go out on a case and you see an elder that has bruising on their face or their neck, their torso, look at their body, their lateral arms, their back. Bruising there, you always want to be suspicious of that it's an indicator of abuse. Also look at fractures, the presence of old and new fractures. I mean, we've seen cases where people have fallen out of bed that shouldn't have been getting out of bed, that should have had railings, and they have broken hips. Again, scalding, ligature marks, I'm going to get back to that. And injuries that match hands, fingers, or objects. We talked about and injuries that don't match the story. Talked about force feeding. Actually had a case where a subject, she had Alzheimer's and she had bruising on her cheek and underneath her chin. And so when I went and interviewed the caretaker, I said, well, how did this lady get the bruising on her face? And the caretaker told me, the paid caretaker, that she rubbed her face on the sheets. Okay, for one, that doesn't match the story. And two, those injuries were consistent with hands. And when I delved further, asked, well, can she feed herself? And I put a spoon in her hand, and the lady couldn't even lift up a fork. So that was a way of showing that these bruises were highly, absolutely suspicious.
And also remember, with the elder population, you're dealing with a group that may be subject to easy bruising, may have onion skin, may have injuries that look worse than they actually are. But similar to a child, you have to look at the nature of the injuries. It's not just the injury itself, it's where it is.
Absolutely. And let's look at this photo right here, ligature mark, talking about ligature marks. This case was actually one of mine again. This woman, the story was when she goes to the hospital, she has a mark on her ankle, and then she also had some marks around her neck that I don't show on here, but it appeared to be a ligature mark around her neck as well. I had a doctor, a physician, look at these, and he said, absolutely, these are ligature marks. So I take that information back to the my interview of the suspect, and the suspect said, well, no, I never tied her down. She, those are from her socks. Well, upon looking at the medical records, because that's also an important piece of evidence, this female that is in this picture, she had suffered a stroke. Her right leg, she had no mobility on that side. The only side that she had mobility on was the left side. She was being restrained so that she could actually not get up. What ended up happening, in this case was filed by our prosecutors, is that the caretaker was taking care of other elders at nighttime in a board and care. She had the care and custody of this person during the day, and the caretaker wanted to sleep during the day. So she would tie down the only leg that enabled this lady to move around. So it's really important to delve deeper on these types of cases and look for these types of marks. Other indicators of physical abuse, and I think Brian just touched on that, injuries that match or don't match the environment, and injuries that don't corroborate the story, isolation, and evidence of financial abuse and exploitation. This was another indicator right here. This lady was not mobile also, and the story didn't match. The caretaker stated that she was unable to move. And I myself, as an officer going out on this and looking at this, or as a detective, I'm thinking this is based on the studies that I'm aware of. This is highly indicative of abuse. She's got bruising on her breast and bruising on her arm, on her lateral arm. Based on the studies, this is highly suspicious of abuse. So these are the kinds of things, injuries you want to look for in your cases. So again, we talked about the bruising studies that came out. So fascinating. Just know that what these studies show is that, and I've used them actually in helping to get cases prosecuted, is that I used to believe that when a bruise came out, if it was yellow the day of the incident, that the person was lying to me. And I can remember having conversations with people saying, well, yeah, they told me they got hit today, but the bruise was yellow. There's no way. But this bruising study showed that actually the day of the incident, people can get yellow bruises. So do not discount the importance of this. Don't discount a subject or a victim because the bruise is yellow the day of onset. 25% of non-abused elders, only 25% remember the cause of their accidental bruises, but 90%, super important, 90% of those people that were abused could remember how they got that bruise. So 90%, so really important if you are able to interview that person, if they have that capacity to interview them.
And remember, they may not be able to identify each and every bruise they have, each and every mark they have.
Correct.
But they may be able to point to one specific injury or one specific event,
Right.
And at least that opens the door to the investigation of that abuse.
Absolutely. Okay, another study that came out of UCI, and was fascinating. 40% of people with dementia had mostly reliable emotional memories. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Don't discount people that have dementia when they're witnesses to cases, okay? As a patrol officer years ago, I responded to a call. It was actually, and I'm going to talk about sexual assault, it was a call of an elderly woman. I think she was about 78, 80 years old. And the reporting party was her child and said, hey, my mom said that she was raped. Can you send an officer to talk to her? I respond on scene, and I encounter the daughter and the mom at the door, and the daughter said, look, can you talk to my mom because I'm having a barbecue in the backyard, and she's really causing problems because she won't stop talking to us about being raped. So I went on my way. The daughter went out to her party. I interviewed the mom, and through the course of the interview, it was clear that she had some type of dementia. And I said to her, well, what did you do after you got, raped? And she said, well, I took a bath. That to me was the key that she had been raped, so I did not discount the fact that she had dementia. Actually ended up transporting her to the hospital. She kept saying the hooded man raped me. She couldn't give me specific details, but getting her into the hospital and getting the SAR exam done actually showed that she had vaginal and rectal tears and bruising in her throat. She had been raped. So do not discount people just because they appear to have dementia. They can have reliable memory to a traumatic event. I have another case that was prosecuted where a woman, over a course of 2 weeks and several interviews by different people, Adult Protective Services, first responders, detective, had kept saying her son-in-law pushed her down, causing injuries on her knees and the hand. I went out and interviewed her after 2 weeks, and I said, well, tell me again what happened. And she demonstrated what happened for me. And I said, well, now, who's this a picture of that I'm holding in my hand? It was a picture of the daughter that she was living with. And she said, well, I don't know who that is. And I said, now tell me again what happened. And she was able to tell me that traumatic event. Do not discount them just because they appear to have dementia.
And again, it's and we'll talk about this in more detail in a little bit, but these type of cases are sometimes similar to a homicide in the sense that you may not have the victim wholly available to you or available at all. And so you've got to at least take what little snippets you get and go forward.
So that's a little bit about physical abuse, and I apologize, but we're going to move on to neglect right now. So what is neglect? It's the refusal or failure of a caretaker, that person of trust, to provide either medical treatment, take people to doctor appointments, give them personal safety, medicine, food or water. And it's also isolating them by not giving them access to certain necessities, such as a phone near their bed, a computer that they can get out, or even a mobility device, such as a walker or a cane. And we're going to talk about this photo that's in here a little bit more. And let me just move forward. I want to see something here. Okay. Something that I want to go back to this photo, something in these cases of neglect, just remember as law enforcement officers, you need to dig deeper. So just because the perpetrator tells you, or it appears that, oh, we took great care of this elder, dig deeper. In this particular case, we actually tossed the bed kind of like a dope search, and underneath what appeared to be clean bedding was clean bedding on top. The woman, she was immaculate on top, and I'll show you a picture of her later. But once we tossed the bed, I found that she had actually been seeping through the bed and eventually onto the floor. So don't be deceived in these cases of neglect by the outer appearance. It happens a lot. People will clean up the elder to make them look good, but you got to dig deeper. Do like a dope toss on that one. Okay, so indicators of neglect. There's bed sores. So there's 4 stages of bed sores. Again, I'm not a doctor, but the first stage is going to be redness that you're going to look for. It's going to be, second stage is going to be like a rash, or I call it road rash. It's where the nerves are exposed. It's very painful, especially coupled with urine or fecal matter that's not being cleaned. Third stage is going to be going into the tissue, muscle, and fourth stage, muscle into the bone. Bed sores are a strong indicator of neglect, and where these can actually lead to death, because a lot of times this person isn't getting cleaned, and these bed sores or decubitus ulcers or pressure sores, whatever you want to call it, they're on bony prominences such as the coccyx or actually rear, the hips and everything. People defecate and they urinate in there, it doesn't get cleaned. It gets infected, leading to sepsis. So in your investigations, you want to get medical records, you want to talk to doctors, you want to get autopsy reports, find out the source of that infection, if it led to that elder's being hospitalized or to their death. Find out what that source of infection was, where it came from.
And a bed sore like this won't happen overnight. So if they're taking care of the person the way they're supposed to be, it's not going to get to this point. So,
and having said that, this is a large one, but some bed sores, depending upon the person's surface, okay. So if the person is laying on a hard surface, a moist environment, I've actually had cases where within a matter of 13 hours, they can develop a bed sore. So be aware that it depends upon, don't let the size actually sway you. They can be small in appearance underneath and then be large once the necrotic tissue is cut away. But depending upon the surface, you can get a bed sore within a matter of hours. And it also depends on the person's health, which is why medical records or lack of medical records are important. Are they malnourished? Is the person unclean? Do they have soiled clothing? Look at the environment that the elder's in. Is the couch that they're sitting on full of urine? Or their clothing full of urine and defecation? Look for these things in cases of neglect. Absence of a phone near the bed, urinary pads. We already talked about some of this. I think something that is important in cases is this particular case of this is a 65-year-old. It's actually a case of mine where her teeth were rotten. The caretaker said she was taking her to the dentist. I provided medical records, dental records, and this picture to a specialist who said that these teeth were not being taken care of and that this would have ultimately led to this person's death. So she was not being taken to her dental appointment. So look at all aspects of an elder.
And also remember, you know, it's not just physical restraint that means you're restraining that elderly person. It's if that person needs a walker, a wheelchair, a cane to get around, then they also need access to that cane, walker, or wheelchair. And so the fact is, if when you're going to do this investigation, the wheelchair is sitting out front and you have to go through a house to get to it, well, it could be a sign that something's going on. Also, you know, the caretaker may be telling you that I'm taking this person to the doctor, but if you don't follow up with the doctor, yeah, those appointments may have been made, but they've also been missed or canceled. And so you again, it's a situation where we've always got to dig a little deeper.
Correct. For example, dialysis. Doctors will prescribe dialysis appointments. If you have a suspect that is refusing to take a person to dialysis, that is neglect. So if that person doesn't receive their dialysis, they will die. So look a little bit, interview nurses and staff. So, okay, so going back, and somebody asked the question, a drug toss. So in law enforcement, sometimes when we're looking for dope on somebody, we toss the beds underneath because that's where people like to hide it. Just be inquisitive like that in these types of cases as well. Just think of it like you're going out and you're doing a regular search for the bad guy. This case right here that you're looking at, observe and investigate, where you saw the mattress up and it was tossed earlier, this is what it looked like walking into the living room of this decedent. Actually, I smelled this house before I even entered it. So it's important we're going to talk about observing and investigating as law enforcement officers. Document what you smell. I smelled urine and I smelled fecal matter when I was on the doorstep. I walked in and what I saw to my right was the fact that this house was not that hoarding means indicative of neglect, but it had, she had a caretaker in there who was her adult son. There was gnats and flies and hoarding everywhere. He had spent 8 hours with her cleaning her up so that when he called the coroner's office, it would look like nothing was wrong. It wasn't until we turned her over and went under the bed that we could see evidence of neglect as well as abuse. She had some unusual bruising as well.
And it's also the crime scene didn't match what Officer Hill was seeing. It didn't match the smells she was smelling. It didn't match the gnats, her condition. Those were all things that were giving her pause to go further.
Okay. Okay, so we already talked about that. We're going to skip on. We already talked about this. Remember, photographing the environment. We're going to kind of speed through because I think we're dragging a little bit. Take photographs of the victim, any exposed wounds. Make sure that it's really good for prosecutors. If at all in law enforcement, you have access to a ruler. I put on the back of my business card a little ruler, so I carry it in my pocket. Have access to a ruler, so when you take pictures of injuries, you have that ruler so the prosecutor can see, and the doctor, if you show it to a doctor, can see the length of the injury. Also, let's see, photograph the exposed wounds. So really super important for first responders. If you're going out into a call and the person's already bandaged up, I don't care. Have the medical personnel, a nurse or a paramedic, remove that bandage. Prosecutors don't want to see pictures of bandages. They want to see the injury itself. Absolutely remove that bandage and take photographs.
You know, the bandage is nice, but I do want to see also what's underneath it. And again, remember, you're dealing with somebody who may not be there when the trial happens or may not be cooperative when the trial happens. Which
is important to record everything and videotape if possible. At my agency, we have body-worn cameras. Really important to record, though. Types of evidence. You have wounds and measurements, medical records, photographs, absolutely, suspect and victim statements. Interview that victim if you can. Even if they, again, if they don't appear to have capacity, interview them anyway. Prosecutor's going to want to see you, and Brian can testify to this. He's going to want me to door knock neighbors. If that person's saying, oh no, my grandmother was out walking every day, and the neighbors don't see her out walking every day, he's going to want to know that because that person's being neglected or isolated. Interview social workers, family members, physicians, and nurses. Get prior police reports or adult protective services reports. Believe it or not, social workers can be your best friend. It's hard for us in law enforcement to, we have cultural divide between social workers and law enforcement, but believe it or not, they can really help and we can really put cases together. So work together with your social worker. Capacity exams and financial records are great pieces of evidence. We're going to talk about this later, but this is actually, we're kind of skipping around, but when you go into a hospital, what really is important, get a blood draw. So go to the ER as a law enforcement officer, tell that charge nurse, I need that blood. Put that blood on hold or test that blood. Because if I find out that the caretaker is telling me, well, okay, I had a case where the caretaker said, oh yeah, I was giving him morphine. Well, I had the blood tested and there was no morphine in that blood. It ends up that the suspect was using the morphine. So get the initial blood draw for the presence or absence of any medication that that subject should be getting. And paramedic run sheet, why is that important? You want to see if the paramedic gave them any medication prior to them being hospitalized.
It's also very important with the paramedic run sheet. There may be some excited utterances coming out there. There may be situations where your victim is saying things to the paramedics, to any medical workers, the nurses, the doctors, and those are statements that if we do lose the victim or the victim becomes uncooperative, we're going to want to try to get in. And those are statements that are being given for the purpose of medical treatment, so they may be able to come in evidentially.
And the other thing is just know that there is a HIPAA exception, and this is super important. I believe you can get this off of the Elder Initiative website as well. There's a HIPAA exception, federal exception, to getting medical records. If the victim is unable to speak for themselves or lacks capacity, the suspect is the caretaker. HIPAA exception allows us as law enforcement officers to get those medical records without a search warrant. Okay.
All right. When you're looking for the physical evidence, there are things you want to look for specifically. You want to see if there's any drugs or drug paraphernalia. And when I'm referring to these drugs and drug paraphernalia, specifically I'm referring to the illegal kind. Is the caregiver involved in drugs? Are you seeing syringes that aren't being used for the victim but are being used by them? Are there beer cans all over the house? Is there damaged property? Are you finding those restraints? You also want to be looking for things like letters, envelopes, emails, texts, social media. You know, a lot of times that caregiver is telling you, oh yeah, I'm taking good care of them, I'm doing all these things, but you may find emails, texts, and social media out there that shows that they weren't doing these things. At times they're telling you they're taking them to the doctor, they're actually playing on Facebook, or they're writing a text that I had to cancel the appointment today because the victim wasn't cooperating.
We actually had a case where a suspect told another family member he was trying to kill the elder, and we found that via letters. So,
also that daily calendar, there may be a calendar of the victim where they're keeping track of doctor's appointments. Suspect may be keeping that calendar of doctor's appointment. There's several situations where that's very helpful. It lets us know what appointments are being made, and then we can follow up and see if those appointments are being kept. If there's any existence of protective orders, you also want to be looking for items in the house that may have that feces, urine, DNA, or blood on them. Also, if you see any financial documents laying around, make sure you're getting pictures of them, if not the documents themselves. On the medications, you want to know from the caregiver, usually they'll tell you this, what prescriptions are is the victim taking? Is that elder or dependent adult taking? You want to know A, so you can test their blood to make sure it's there. B, so you can make sure that it's being given. And C, it also is going to let us know who's been prescribing it. It may be a situation where that victim is going to several different doctors so the caregiver can cover up that abuse. So if you're finding pain medication prescribed by 4 or 5 different doctors, it can let you know that perhaps there's a reason they're shopping doctors to hide the injuries, or maybe they're shopping doctors to allow the caregiver to get those drugs.
the other thing you can do with these medications, you want to look at what pharmacy they came out of and call that pharmacy. They're a big help as well in these types of cases. Note the dosage and the amount of pills that are remaining in the bottle.
All right. Another section you want to look for is some documentary evidence. You want to follow up and make sure and see if there's been any family court proceedings. has the caregiver done anything that is going to be filed in court that we can use as evidence later? Have there been any prior 911 calls? If we can, ask to see the suspect's phone to see who he was talking to. He may be telling you he was, doing X, Y, and Z, and you take a look at that phone, and he may not have been. He may have been on the phone, texting, talking, etc. It also may be something you just need to gather the phone and get for a search warrant later. You also want to look for the caregiver if they have power of attorney, if there's a will in place, any medical directives or financial documents that can give you the motive that perhaps a caregiver is doing these things.
And the will, the financial records, power of attorney, that gets into another aspect of financial abuse that we don't have time to talk about today. But absolutely you want to look for these things, especially power of attorney. Remember, power of attorney in our state does not have to be, it's not court certified. So this is a very touchy one. But you want to, if somebody comes out and says, oh, I have power of attorney, dig deeper. They might not necessarily, and it really doesn't always have standing. So, okay. Again, we already talked about hospital response. We talked about where to look for pressure sores as well as bruises. Also look for the document in your investigation if the person is malnourished, what their height and weight is. If they're supposedly being fed extremely well per the caretaker and yet they are 6'2" and only weigh 90 pounds, I'm highly suspicious. So if a caretaker is telling me they're getting feeding them well and the story doesn't match, document that. And again, we already talked about how to document these cases. Photography, soiled clothing, bloodstained items, property damage, crime scene. And something important, let's go over here. You want pictures of the outside of the residence, each room, the victim, the chair and the couch, because sometimes those are really soiled. Again, look underneath the mattresses, look in cupboards, look in the refrigerator. It was actually a case of mine where I found in another refrigerator evidence of deceased animals. So the caretaker was actually practicing killing animals. They had, her mother was left on the floor for 3 days. She actually had objects embedded into her skin. So things you want to look for. Check the kitchen, refrigerator, cupboards, trash. Is this person eating?
Is the food in the house that they can be eating? Are they on any kind of restricted diet? And that diet has to be there if they're eating it.
Diabetes. Also
remember, too, part of the reason you're taking pictures of outside the house in addition to inside the house is we're looking for discrepancies. If the outside of the house is immaculate and 90% of the house is immaculate and the room that the victim's in is a pigsty, that's a clue that that caregiver is not giving them adequate care. In fact, when we go back at the end to the picture we showed you at the front of the two people, one in the hospital bed and one in their house that were deceased, that comes into play there because part of it gave off red lights that there was a problem happening, and then when the officers dug deeper, it turned out there wasn't an issue on one of those two cases.
Again, look where the victim sleeps, where the abuser sleeps. Look at clothing, sheets, hamper, mattress, bedding. Important, if the caretaker tells you that they are bathing this person every day or they're giving them a shower or they are using the person's using the toilet, you go in, you find that the toilet is full or not working, which happens in a lot of these cases, or you see that the shower has cobwebs and clothing drying in it, then you know the caretaker's story doesn't fit and they're not bathing that person. They can't demonstrate that to you. So look deeper.
All right, when you're taking the interview, there's a couple of things you need to make sure of. First of all, you want to make sure that the suspect is not present with that elder when you're taking the statement. You don't want anybody, if possible, in the room with you other than another law enforcement or medical personnel, because you don't want anybody to intimidate that victim. You want to treat them like an adult, treat them like an intelligent person as much as possible, and give them that respect. You want to make sure that you're not working them too hard. You want to, as I said, you want to give them the respect, addressing them by their last name. Make sure they have anything they need. Do they need hearing aids? Do they need glasses? Do you need to get them a glass of water? Anything to put them in that comfortable situation. Also, observe their demeanor, body language, and appearance. And something that's always important, if you can, see how they react to the suspect. You know, are they cowering and shy around the suspect? And then all of a sudden when you go to interview them, does their body language change? Does their demeanor change? Does the appearance change? Those are things that can help us down the line.
Just remember, when you're interviewing this elder, make sure the suspect isn't there. Treat them with respect and dignity. I know that this sounds minute, but it's really important. And take your time with them. Also, again, interview the neighbors, roommates, caregivers, physicians. And caretaker interview. Ask them, what's their training? If it's in a skilled nursing facility, okay, what's your training? If it's somebody that's in the home, what's your training? Ask them what they know. For our statute, it's important that they know their age. How old are they? What's the elder's physical ailments? And what are your responsibilities as a caretaker? Do you feed them? Do you bathe them? Do you change them? And how do you do all this? If you give them medications, how often? If they get insulin, how do you give them insulin? I always have them show me, okay, where do you keep the insulin? Where do you keep the syringe? Half the time they can't tell me because they're not giving that person the medication that they're supposed to get. If there's an ulcer, decubitus ulcer, pressure sore, how are you treating it? Show me the medication you're using. Show me the doctor's prescription. Usually they can't show me that because they are not following doctor's orders. And we'll go on because I know we're running. We want to make sure that we get time for your questions and answers. So
Also, a lot of times, too, the caregiver is going to tell you, I'm not the caregiver. I'm just the son,
Correct.
the daughter. And part of asking those questions is, well, did you drive them to doctor's appointments? How did they get to doctor's appointments? Because the more details you get, you're going to find out that this person probably was acting as a de facto caregiver, even though they're claiming they're not.
Okay, I really want to talk about this very briefly, and I'm leaving time for Q&A. There are multidisciplinary teams available or forensic centers throughout the United States. Not enough, so if you can create some in your own jurisdiction, that would be great. And you could also go onto the Elder Initiative website to find information on that. But collaborate with your adult protective services, great resource. Law enforcement, program, there's geriatricians in your area, geropsychologists, public guardians, older adult services, city attorneys. Talk to people. There are other people that want to do the right thing and get these cases brought to the forefront and prosecuted. Coroner's office, ombudsman, advocates, people can all be resources for you. Community state licensing, in-home support services, Medi-Cal fraud and elder abuse, and Department of Public Health. Go on to your, UCI has a Center of Excellence resource, NCEA has resources, and the Elder Initiative websites have resources. You guys can go on these and do further research. And I know we threw a lot of information out at you. These cases can get prosecuted. You're not alone in working them. We are all resources. My phone number is up there. We'll be resources for you. And we're going to take Q&A, I guess.
Yeah, also remember, too, and we did mention it, but the victims in these cases, we've got to remember that, you know, they may be available and cooperative when we start the investigation. They may not be available or may not be cooperative when we end it.
Correct.
So the investigation has to be treated, for lack of a better term, like a homicide.
Absolutely.
Because we want to make sure that we can proceed without the victim. Now, in some of the questions we've had that have been typed in, one of the questions was, what if the resident is living like this by themselves? There's no other outside abuse. Well, there's a couple of factors we need to consider in when we're looking at that. You know, if it's somebody who is otherwise independent, the pack rat situation, and they're choosing to live like this and not provide themselves adequate medical care, well, at least in our jurisdiction, that's where we'd involve our APS team, our Adult Protective Services. We'd have them go out, they determine if that person is a danger to themselves, to determine if there should be a conservator or some kind of intervention. If they're living like that themselves, but have family members who are checking on them, bringing food, shopping for groceries, well, then that's a situation where there may be some outside abuse. So hopefully, Pam Taylor, that answers that question. Also, another question from Robert Geller was, what right does the elder victim or the dependent adult have to refuse to cooperate or be photographed? It's just like the victim of any other crime. They can absolutely refuse not to participate. Now then, that being said, in Anaheim, we have the luxury of our officers are wearing body-worn cameras. So we'll be able to get, you know, whatever the officer sees, we'll see. And so we'll get some of those pictures, maybe not the details we want. We'll be able to get search warrants and medical requests for documentation later, and we can go on and deal with that. But again, it's, if they don't want to provide us a statement, that's no different than if, the suspect had killed the victim. We're still going to have to go out and handle that investigation.
Okay, which question is that?
Vanessa,
Yes. Citing the HIPAA exception, I apologize, I don't have that in front of me. There is an exception, and that is also the HIPAA exception is available on the Elder Initiative website. You can email me also. I can provide you with a copy of that. It's chill@anaheim.net. Again, that's chill@anaheim.net, and I'll provide you a little copy of that. And as far as is APS required to use SOC 343 in California, Adult Protective Services, I don't know their section, but they are mandated reporters, cross-reporters to law enforcement. What is really important for us in law enforcement, though, is to have that social worker call us specifically. You guys go out on a lot of cases, but when that raises the hair on the back of your neck, call us so that we can respond out there immediately.
All right, and as far as not prosecuting because family members are on the count, that's going to have to be on a case-by-case basis. The problem with a lot when we're getting into financial abuse, and we really didn't cover financial abuse in this particular workshop, is if they're on the account, we've got to look for other factors. The defense always to the financial abuse is, well, they told me that I could buy this, or I could go to Disneyland, or I could get a new coat or go on vacation, and that's why I'm on the account, so I can do those things. And again, it's the information we need to investigate fully. Have I investigated cases like that? Yes. When I have the victim telling me I didn't give them permission, when the victim is on a tight budget and there's no way that they would be approving those type of things, yes, those get prosecuted, and that's Debbie Gellert. It just depends on the specific fact circumstances. Again, that's more of the financial abuse. Now, Tammy Fitzgerald, as far as our patrol officers investigating at this level, I will tell you, we have a lot of officers who do investigate at this level and a lot of officers that don't. That's part of the reason we engage in patrol trainings. I've gone out to patrol trainings on strangulation to give them more information. We've gone out on elder abuse and to get them into that. Then it's turned over to the detectives. And when we're saying that this information should be achieved at the patrol level, I'm not expecting every patrol officer to get me everything on this list. What I'm expecting them to do is as complete of investigation as they can when they're out there in the field, and then that's going to be cleaned up by my detectives. My detectives are going to follow up on that. The officer in the field may not be able to call that doctor and find out did they keep their appointment, may not be able to check with the pharmacy and the prescription. That's what my detectives are for, okay? But again, the more the officers in the field can get when it's fresh and there, the more likely my detective can follow up on it. We're kind of looking at the list right now to see if we missed any. Debbie, you have a point there about APS. And a lot of times APS, if it's a hoarding situation, they're living on their own and they're confident they won't intervene. Now, I will tell you, prior to working with the Family Justice Center and doing these type of investigations, I spent a period of time working with our code enforcement, doing those code enforcement investigations. And I will tell you, those hoarding homes have code violations. And, you can intervene that way. I have prosecuted, I have done receiverships, I have basically taken over the homes of those independent elders who are living in conditions that are unsafe for them and unsafe for the neighbors. It's a time-consuming process, but it's something that can get it taken care of. But again, it may require an inspection warrant. It may require talking to the neighbors. But there are ways to do it. And yes, at the beginning of the PowerPoint there, Aaron Van Duzer, there were on our bios, there are email addresses. For Cherie Hill, it's Chill, Hill, @anaheim.net, and for me it's B as in boy, Fox, Foxx, @anaheim.net. But they are on the slides, and the PowerPoint will be available for you.
And Charles, what process was used to interview developmentally disabled clients? Actually, the same process. Just take our time. We actually have tasks out here in Orange County where we can actually take our developmentally disabled clients and have a specialized interviewer, a social worker, interview them. But it's the same process. I mean, really out here, I treat those cases like I do my elder cases. Just, you know, if they can't talk to me, I develop the case around them. I put the case together based on all the evidence that I find around them. Another question, do we have tips regarding investigating abuse and neglect in facility settings? The same exact thing. The only difference is you have an ombudsman. The ombudsman is like a social worker, but for skilled nursing facilities. They can go in and get any medical records that you need. You're going to go into those facilities and put your investigation together the same way that you would out in the field, but you've got the ombudsman that could actually help you out by accessing medical records. Also, and I know here in our state, we have the Bureau of Medi-Cal that will go out with us and have officers that will go out and investigate as well. But just investigate those cases exactly like you would out in the field, like we're just telling you. You're going to want to interview. The only difference is you have documentation as far as those caretakers in the facilities, they have to go through training. So you want to go in and go to their human resources, get that training record. See where that person is signed off, that they know how to lift that person properly, that they know how to turn them over every 2 hours, that they know how to clean them. Once they sign off on that and then you find they're not doing that, that's great. That's great to put your case together.
Also, Brittany, while we hope they receive training to preserve that evidence, they may not. So once law enforcement has come out, it's now law enforcement's crime scene. And law enforcement, at least, you know, with the agencies I've dealt with, what's going to happen is this. If the agency or the facility is not allowing the officers to do an investigation, they're going to leave an officer there, they're going to do a call out for the detectives, and the detectives are going to start the search warrant process rolling. So the law enforcement's going to preserve that scene if there's any question about it. So if the red flags are there, your law enforcement's the one who's going to have to preserve that scene at that point.
Another question was, why does the APS take long to respond? It's a tentative response in our state unless we call for an immediate response, and they all have their own guidelines.
And, you know, that question is easiest to answer the way I'm sure we all know, and that is money, time, and people. There's not enough time, there's not enough money, and there's not enough people to get out there sooner. And unless you let them know the seriousness of it, they're not going to respond quickly. They're going to put it on their list and get to it when they get to it. We did talk a little bit to the Elder Justice Initiative about doing a webinar on financial exploration, because there's a lot of topics out there that need to be covered on everything. And so hopefully there'll be another one coming along. And again, we're back to seeing if there's any questions we missed. All right, and Debbie, yeah, code enforcement sometimes, based on their own policies, will not get involved if the issue is outside but not on the inside. But again, that's where talking to your neighbors sometimes helps. A lot of times there may be an ugly house, a dirty house from the outside, and they won't go in. But when that code enforcement goes out the first time, I found that it's very easy to get inside that first time before that person knows there may be a problem. But on the other hand, at least in California, our code enforcement officers have a right to take pictures anywhere they're legally entitled to be. So if they're doing that investigation out the outside, you know, they may be able to get information to get us on the inside. The neighbors may be telling us about rats infesting their property that are coming from next door, bugs coming from next doors, odors coming from next door. Again, in California, we have something that's called an inspection warrant that we can apply for if we're looking for health and safety code violations based on the outside conditions. And Lori has indicated that on November 2nd, there's a webinar coming up on suspicious activities and report. and their role in investigation of elder financial exploration. So that's out there for you to get. And I'm sure...
in order to get on the email, there's a question. You go ahead on the Elder Initiative website, Elder Justice Initiative website, and you can sign up for their emails. It's a great resource. So Elder Justice Initiative. And any other questions?
Oh, we got some people typing. So now it looks like, I don't know if any of you saw it, but it looks like one of the participants was indicating that the Aurora Police Department has a task force where
That's fantastic.
they're doing some training and they're offering your help. So if you go through the chat, you can see what she had to say. And it does look like Lori McGee has just posted the website and put it out there. And I think that's it, unless we see any more questions. It looks like we may be getting one more.
And if you have any questions or need any support, we're all here on the same page. We want to do the right thing for our elder victims. So please feel free to contact me. I will do all that I can to help you.
You know, as far as the, Kevin Gwynn asked if there's an exclusion list for convicted caregivers. It's hard to say that because it depends on your state, whether they have to be licensed or registered in your state. You know, if they're licensed and registered, the conviction is going to prevent them from being licensed or registered.
Correct.
If they're not, then they're not going to have to report it anywhere. You know, it's your APS worker or any of the social workers out there should be telling family members or the elder or dependent people what they need to be doing when they're looking for a caregiver. Because you can ask for references, and you should be calling those references. It's no different than a nanny or a babysitter that you're trusting your child with. You don't want to let somebody into your house unless you know what their experience is and what their problems have been.
And it's a sad statement, but actually within the prison system, parolees are actually teaching other prisoners how to target elders, so we need to be aware of that. And thank you so much, all of you, for your interest in this topic. I really appreciate it.
Great. Okay, I think I don't think there's any more questions coming in. I guess if anyone that's listening in today has additional questions or thoughts that you'd like to share, feel free to email them to the email address on the screen, elder.justice@usdoj.gov. I think that concludes today's presentation. I want to thank Cherie and Brian for the presentation. I thought it was really well done, and hopefully everybody felt the same. And just a friendly reminder that the webinar was recorded and will be archived along with the presentation slides on the Elder Justice website or on the TTAC website. All right, thank you, everyone.
Lauren?
Yolanda, one last, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I forgot. Okay, so the picture on the right at the very beginning, that was an immaculate home. That woman was very well taken care of. She was very well taken care of. She actually died of pancreatic cancer. Her husband was crying when I went out there. He didn't know where to put the clothes. That was the only room that actually had clothes in it. If you look at it, she had a bottle of water, medication, and a phone next to her bed. She was very well loved and taken care of. Yep. The subject on the left was a lawyer had gone out, a guardian had gone out the day before. He was hospitalized. The victim was hospitalized. Thought the guy was being taken care of immaculately based on the granddaughter's statement and the way he looked. Those pressure sores you saw were his pressure sores. He was the guy that was 6 foot that only weighed 90 pounds.
I'm jumping all over here. Hopefully I'll get it back. And those were the two pictures at the beginning. When you looked at and here we go. When you looked at the picture on the right, you see that wall in the background that looks like a pack rat situation. It was actually, as Detective Hill said, a situation where the husband was trying his best he could to take care of her. He was washing and cleaning those clothes, folding them up, and then because of her incapacity, didn't know what to do with them, so as best he could, he was stacking them up there. And then the one on the left, who's actually with medical equipment in a hospital, was the one being neglected. So again, the pictures don't always tell the whole story. All right, I think that's it.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you everyone. Bye-bye.